ringing or someone eating a packet of crisps. So just for ease for people to hear, with so many people in the room, we've decided to mute everyone. Thank you everyone for coming. We have people from all over Scotland, and we are joined by some colleagues from supporting communities in Northern Ireland as well. So it's great to see everybody here, and thank you for coming along and supporting us. Really, just very quickly, I'll run through the agenda for today. Obviously, I'm speaking to you, and absolutely delighted that the Housing and Communities Minister, Kevin Stewart, is going to be speaking after me. So you didn't actually come here to listen to me gibbering, so I will gibber for a very short period of time. Tony's going to talk us through an introduction to Scrutiny. We'll have a well-earned break, so those of you who are familiar with Zoom and Teams calls, you know that it does take a little while to get used to it, and it can be quite draining. We're then going on to just a general question and answer session led by Tony and I, but we'd welcome participants to solve some of the issues, I suppose. And then we've got Michael Cameron coming on this afternoon. So we move on to day two. Tomorrow is all about performance and how various organisations report their performance, making sense of performance, a few different ways to look at that. And on day three, we've got some real examples of how people have been working with Scrutiny across Scotland. So very briefly, I'm not going to share my stuff anymore. Oh, and now it's not working. No, sorry. We worked it earlier and it seemed to be working, and now it doesn't seem to be working. So, and it seems to be that we have two people in charge of the meeting. That's never a good idea. I seem to have lost it completely. I hope I'm still on the screen. So moving swiftly on, you all know Scrutiny's been about for a wee while now. And not just the few years when the regulator suggested that tenants should be involved in monitoring and scrutinising their landlord's performance. It's been about in many forms. Tenants have been working with their landlords over many years to look at performance and to look at monitoring and driving forward services. And in the past few years, we've had scrutiny panels, we've had PILs, we've had PINs, we've had service review groups, we've had a whole range of different names for scrutiny organisations, and now we're kind of comfortable in whatever works. There's no one solution to working for scrutiny. We did run through the tech this morning and it seemed to work this morning. It doesn't seem to be working for me just now, so I'm going to try and stop sharing my screen. And we are absolutely delighted that the Housing and Communities Minister, Mr Kevin Stewart, is here today, and Kevin's going to, or the Minister's going to talk to you now. So I will try and stop sharing my screen. That's not working. Elaine, could you try and it says take control. I don't really want to do that.
I'm doing it.
You're doing it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, there we are. So if I could just hand over to the Minister now, I've got over that panic, and ask Mr Kevin Stewart to give us his words of wisdom, and thank you so much for agreeing to launch our Scrutiny Week. Mr Stewart.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm not so sure about words of wisdom at this time on a Monday morning when all of the IT seems to be going a bit skew with. But thanks for inviting me today, and good morning to you all. As I often say these days, it's very unusual to sit here in front of a screen in your house talking to folks remotely rather than in person. However, I suppose it is the next best thing, and I'm delighted to be able to launch this Scrutiny Week, TPAS Scotland's first ever Scrutiny Week today. It's always great to see new events and activities taking place in the sector, particularly, of course, during these challenging times. And I know that Leslie and the TPAS team have planned an exciting and engaging programme of sessions for this week, which I'm certain you'll all get a fair amount out of. I've been asked to kick off the event by talking about the Scottish Government's commitment to tenant scrutiny, and to share some of my own thoughts on the role of scrutiny in the housing sector. In my time as Minister for Local Government, Housing and Planning, I've seen firsthand some of the terrific outcomes achieved as a direct result of scrutiny activity. Scrutiny is without doubt a powerful tool, and when it's done well, it can have huge benefits for tenants, landlords, and communities. It sometimes still feels as though the concept of scrutiny is quite new for some landlords and their tenants. However, time flies, and it's actually been over a decade now since the initial green shoots of scrutiny began to take root in our housing landscape with the Housing Scotland Act 2010. Legislation which underpinned a time of real significant change in the social housing sector and put the priorities of tenants and other service users at the heart of landlords' work. The 2010 Act introduced the groundbreaking Scottish Social Housing Charter, along with a new regulatory regime for the social housing sector through the Independent Scottish Housing Regulator's annual return on the Charter, and a new approach to performance reporting. This new approach included individual landlord reports and an interactive comparison tool which provides data and information for essential scrutiny. When I was invited to speak at this event, I started to reflect back on those years of rapid change following the 2010 Act and on the themes of scrutiny. Obviously, this week's Scrutiny Week's themes are a capture of all that has gone on. And I can say that the Scottish Government is still very much committed to scrutiny, and we are always willing to talk about how we achieve that and how it is working in practice today. When we launched and funded the Stepping Up to Scrutiny programme in 2013, we wanted scrutiny to empower tenants to work with their landlords to analyse and interpret performance information as a way of shaping and improving services and getting better value for money. We wanted to embed a culture of scrutiny within organisations and to strengthen connections through partnership working and across services. Stepping Up to Scrutiny absolutely represents the Scottish Government's commitment to tenant scrutiny, with just under £250,000 invested in a 3-year programme to support social landlords in Scotland to develop and improve their scrutiny activities and practice. For those who aren't familiar with the programme, all of the training materials are available for free online, and they're all well worth reading for anyone looking to improve or enhance their approach. So how is scrutiny working on the ground, you may ask? Is it delivering on these objectives? Firstly, let's think about empowering tenants. The Charter, the ARC and the suite of performance information published by the Scottish Housing Regulator has given tenants and service users more information about their landlord's performance than ever before. Robust performance information is in many ways the cornerstone of effective scrutiny and gives folk the ability to analyse and interrogate information, and I think that that is hugely empowering for tenants. In addition, the tenant scrutiny panels and groups have sprung up the length and breadth of Scotland, working with landlords of all types and sizes. And we know that these groups are well trained, well supported and encouraged by landlords in the scrutiny work that they undertake. They carry out work on a hugely diverse range of areas, scrutinising landlord performance and service delivery, which in turn delivers real improvements for tenants and communities and better value for money. This, for me, is real tenant empowerment without a doubt. I mentioned earlier the importance of partnership working and building a culture of scrutiny within organisations. It's very clear that scrutiny is most effective when tenants and landlords commit wholeheartedly to do it. They must work openly. they must work collaboratively in order to achieve the shared goals that have been set. For many landlords, scrutiny is now embedded into their business practice, and I want to see all landlords take this approach. Over the last 2 years, the government has sponsored the Next Steps programme, designed to support social landlords to improve their approaches to tenant engagement, of which scrutiny is no small part. To date, 16 landlords have been involved with the programme, which is delivered on our behalf by TPAS and by the Tenants Information Service. We have commissioned TPAS to develop practice-based guidance based on the key themes and outcomes of the first 2 years of the programme to support landlords in the sector in developing and enhancing their tenant engagement work. And during these challenging times, when people have been physically remote from each other, I am greatly encouraged to see a continuing commitment to keep scrutiny activities going during the course of this pandemic. Since the initial lockdown in March, I've heard of many great examples of work going on to ensure that tenants and service users can continue with scrutiny work, from provision of and training on IT equipment and tablets, the rollout of video conferencing tools, and the use of messaging apps and social media. All of those have proved to be vital in keeping tenants and landlords engaged and in touch, despite challenges to the usual ways of working. Looking to the future, the pandemic has provided an opportunity to take a fresh look at tenant engagement and how we do it. Tech is helping to include many of those who may, for a variety of reasons, have been less able to participate in traditional face-to-face scrutiny activities. We all know that there is still much to do to enable everyone who wants to access online engagement. And landlords are continuing to look for ways to involve these folks. However, I think we can all be greatly encouraged by the progress being made to further embed the use of technology in the housing sector. I'll close by saying this. Scrutiny to date has undoubtedly empowered tenants, not only in identifying service strengths and weaknesses, but in shaping and improving services on the ground. Many of you at today's event will have been involved in local scrutiny and know firsthand the difference that this can make. And as we look forward to the return of a more normal life, the creativity that's been used during this time to bring in innovative ways of working quickly and our shared commitment to tenant engagement makes me feel certain that scrutiny has both a successful past and a bright future. I'll hand back now to Leslie to lead you in the first session. It's been my pleasure to talk to you all today. I hope you enjoy your week. Leslie, I am willing to take any questions if there's time for that and if that's allowed. But thanks again for inviting me this morning.
Okay, thanks, Minister, and thank you for your inspiring words. And I think we all seek returning to normal, but I think housing has done it very well. I think housing has enveloped and embraced people, and I think scrutiny has is going to take off again, as it's doing just now. And I know how personally committed you are to making sure that tenants are empowered to improve services. So thank you so much for that. The Minister's very graciously said that he can take some questions. So if you have a question, can you put your hand up on the wee hand icon, or can you use the chat button? I know some of you might struggle to use the wee hand, but can you keep your questions, if you have them, short, please? Any questions?
Don't be shy.
Not usually a shy audience, Minister. Any questions?
Doesn't look like it.
No, nobody want to ask anything. You must have covered all the. Oh, Alistair. There you go, Alistair. Alistair Mackenzie.
Yeah, mine's not a question. It's just a thank you to the Minister for the words of wisdom he's given us.
Thanks, Alistair.
Well, thank you for that, Alistair. Can I wish everyone then a very good day? I'm sure that there will be some very, very, very robust discussions. And for those of you that have been engaging with others during this time, can I thank you very much on behalf of the government for all of the work that you're doing. The constant communication that has been going on is extremely beneficial because we know that social isolation is a real difficulty at this moment in time. So thanks a lot for all of your efforts, and I hope you have a brilliant Scrutiny week. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Really
Cheers.
appreciate you coming along. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. So moving on. We've now got Tony, and Tony's just going to give you a presentation. Hopefully the tech will work. We certainly tried a few times this morning and it worked, and then it went horribly wrong when I had to do my bit earlier on. So I'm kind of hoping, Tony, are you there in the wings? Are you going to share your presentation?
Yeah, just give us a sec. We'll just get ourselves moving.
Okay, thanks, Tony.
It doesn't seem to want to play with just now. Hang on. And it was.
If you can't get it to work, Tony, I can put it up, and then you can tell me. I can be your assistant. No, is it not playing?
But it seems to be just going really slow.
Okay. Okay. If you just all sing amongst yourselves, here we go.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just mute my. I'll mute my mic now, Tony.
Okay. Well, hello. How are you doing? Thanks for coming along to our first Scrutiny week. I hope it's of use to you. I found this session quite difficult in the planning because I was to introduce Scrutiny, and to be quite frankly, there's a lot of experts in the room. So what I've attempted to do is do a first wee bit of, which is basically what I'm thinking about Scrutiny, and then start to think more about what I would call the structure of Scrutiny and how that might be of use for new people to think about, but also for folks who have been about for a while and thinking about, have they reviewed what they do and can that actually be improved? Maybe it might be to encourage more people to come in. I don't know. It would be all very much up to yourselves locally. So I'll just charge on. Thanks very much. As I think has already been said, Scrutiny isn't actually new. I think that Scrutiny's been going on ever since the first couple of tenants got together and started having a moan about their landlords, which seems to me to have been something that must have been happening for centuries. But certainly back in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a development of a thing called tenant-led inspections, which I think came first and foremost from West Lothian Council, taken up by Aberdeen City Council and Stirling Council very, very much. And really that was where people were starting to, tenants were systematically looking at the way that a service is being delivered. Now, obviously, with the 2010, with the new Act, with the Charter, with the introduction of the Scottish Housing Regulator, and they're looking at measuring and assessing and producing reports on the performance of landlords. It's taken a little bit of a gaze at the data that's available, and prior to that there was data available, but we didn't really use it very much. And I think that's what has really changed in the last few years, is the desire to look at the data that's there and to use that as much as possible to inform what we're doing in Scrutiny. I personally don't think that Scrutiny is primarily about looking at spreadsheets with lots of facts and figures. I think the most active and engaging part of Scrutiny is when people get out there and start to test what they are seeing on these spreadsheets and to talk to tenants about it. That's where I think Scrutiny really has a power. But there are other parts of tenant involvement and tenant participation that can and do that. So I think it's really important that when people are thinking about doing and getting involved in Scrutiny, that they think about what's about and what other activities or other ways would best suit their community. There are other ways, and Scrutiny is a powerful tool, but it's not the only tool. So why would folk get involved in Scrutiny? The first thing I've put down there is improving services. And I think that is an important facet of it. But we also have to remember that we can't keep simply doing more all the time. We have to do it smarter. We have to make sure that the second point is secured, that we are getting value for money. We've got to be trying to make sure that the services that we're delivering actually matches the needs of the people that are paying for them, the tenants. And I think that's really quite an important feature. It's not what the landlord or anybody else wants to be delivered. I think a large part of Scrutiny needs to be considering about what do the tenants actually need and want. And sometimes Scrutiny tends to be seen as something that is driven by the landlord's service standards and the landlord's data. But actually, it really needs to have that focus on what tenants are actually needing, what tenants are actually wanting, and what tenants are actually willing to pay for. The other thing for me about Scrutiny is that it is a way of involving tenants, and quite often it's tenants who don't really want to be involved in other ways. They don't want to be involved simply by ticking a box in a survey or answering a few questions. They might not find it difficult to come to public meetings, or they might not like to attend public meetings, or they might not wish to be involved in a tenants group. So it's another arm, it's another option that people can add to the range of services that tenants can get involved in, and the range of ways that tenants can get involved in those services. So if you go down the Scrutiny road, what is the group of people going to get involved in? And that's another, we constantly have this battle of trying to find out what's the most appropriate term for this. A lot of people don't like the word scrutiny. They find it quite a negative term. As I think I've probably said to many people, this is comes the Scrutari. We're not looking, who were ancient Rome's midge-rakers, were not looking for crap. They were looking for the gems in the municipal dumps so that they could actually learn and earn their living from it. It wasn't about picking holes in things and trying to show people up. it was actually quite a positive thing to be involved in, and we've got to try and make sure that our modern our modern interpretation of what the scrutiny actually means is quite positive. But it doesn't matter what name you call it, it's what you're doing with it. That's what's important to me. And the first thing that I wanted to flag up about what a group might be actually doing is its independence. It needs to have an independent view of the way that services are being performed, which is one of the reasons why so many formal scrutiny groups will not allow tenant members of boards, etc., to be on it, because they are setting it and checking out and assessing what the board has actually set up. Is probably not the best thing to be doing. To be checking yourself is probably a recipe for disaster. But definitely having that independent view, and it's also an independent view maybe from local tenants federations or local tenants groups. Maybe there needs to be a level of independence away from the more traditional parts of tenant participation. I think also a scrutiny panel needs to be thinking along the lines of being a critical friend. We have to be able to say, no, that's not right, but in a way in which nobody falls out with each other. No one is attempting to put knives in anybody's backs. We are there together to work together to benefit tenants. The other part for me, in terms of what the role of the scrutiny panel or whatever else you call it is to develop tenant-led scrutiny activities. It's about going out there and finding out what tenants are thinking, what tenants are receiving. Yes, it has to be based on the service standards and the targets and everything else that the landlord has set. Hopefully they've set them with tenants being involved. But that's where might be a starting point, but you're going out and you're checking to see, is this actually being delivered? And by the way, is this what is being delivered actually wanted by tenants? Is it something there that tenants actually want? So these activities are going out and talking to people, talking to your fellow tenants, talking to other service users to find out, is it happening on the ground the way that it's been envisaged? The panels are also assessing the performance against the service standards, the Scottish Housing Regulators requirements and the Charter, so that we are always feeding back to the same set of outputs of standards. We have a shared agenda, and I suppose that's one of the weaknesses of traditional tenant participation, in that quite often in the past, what a landlord thought was the repair service was not what the tenant thought was the repair service, and we weren't singing from the same hymn sheet, and quite often those misinterpretations of each other's stance was actually causing conflict. Hopefully, by using the same hymn sheet, we end up singing the same tune. And we have a dialogue that's based on mutual respect and mutual knowledge. Ultimately, what a tenant's scrutiny panel is doing is highlighting the landlord's performance. Is it exceeding what tenants expect, or does it fall below what tenants expect? And I think it's important that we see that it could be both. we have to know what tenants expect. What are the expectations of tenants, and how are they compared with the performance standards, the performance delivery, what that landlords are actually offering? Hopefully, through a critical friend who's independent, who's going out and testing and checking and making sure that it's in reality, that is what is reflected in the performance data. That hopefully by working together, and we end up with ideas, which we, and scrutiny is often called recommendations, for change. Change that will actually benefit tenants. The final thing, and this is where it takes me on to the second part of the, is that I actually think it's really important that the panel scrutinises its own scrutiny. I think we have to, especially now that we are talking about most of the early groups being maybe 5, 6 years old, maybe even a bit older, that they are going and checking to make sure that how they're doing it takes account of their experience and the changing circumstances that people are in. As the Minister said, this is a trying time. We're now not getting to go out and have the face-to-face contact that we want. If we are talking about doing scrutiny, how do we do that if we cannot go out and get involved in those tenant-led inspection type activities that would normally be done out in the community? How are we going to do that? We need to see how we can have a think about how to make that work for ourselves. So I wanted to talk a bit about scrutiny structures. I wanted to think about them as being ways in which we make the principles behind scrutiny fit local circumstances. Not every community can do it in exactly the same way. I think that when we're talking about a scrutiny structure, we need to be developing it together, tenants and landlords working together to make that scrutiny structure fit in with both the local community's needs and also with the landlord's needs. If we can minimise the friction between those two things, scrutiny works better. That doesn't mean that we don't have friction, but it does mean that we minimise it. The other thing for me is that whether you're starting off as a new organisation getting involved in scrutiny or one that's been about for a long time that's actually reviewing what it's been doing, we need to take into account what we've learned. In 2013-14, tenants sat and went through stepping up to scrutiny, and it was new and it was extremely challenging for many people. Some of those people have held on and keep on going, thank God for them, and they have learned vast amounts. They have a real expertise in it. We need to make sure that their learning is included and reflected in the scrutiny structures that we're using. So for me, when I'm talking about a scrutiny structure, what do I actually mean? Well, I'm actually trying to describe the relationships between the groups, the tenants, and the landlord. And because it's not about bureaucracy. It's about making sure that everyone knows what's going on and that we link together so that we can together be as effective and as involving as we can. The first thing I wanted to look at was recruitment and membership. The very first proto scrutiny group that I was involved in had a very formal recruitment process. It advertised. It had an application form. People who wished would complete that form and be interviewed by other tenants to see whether or not they could become members. And when they did become members, they had a set training to go through. They had to achieve certain things. Over the years since then, there has been, I think, more and more of if you're interested, you're in. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think we should somewhere sit and think about whether or not that's the most effective way for us. It might be in one place, it might not be in another. So we have to think about how we're going to recruit people. Getting people to engage is probably the hardest thing that any of us can actually get involved in. We're asking people to volunteer, and there's loads of people in this room who do so. Thank God for you. But it's one of the things, how do we make it attractive? How do we support people to be able to do that in a way that suits them? Hopefully, scrutiny is one of those ways. Excuse me, I'm drying up here. So we need to be thinking about how we're recruiting people and the membership that's there. We need to be thinking about the relationships and the roles within scrutiny. Who does the panel link to get information and ask questions? Is there is that clear? Is that known by the staff that you're going to go and talk to? Because sometimes in my experience it's not. It's known by one or two individuals within the organisation, but when a panel goes and talks to someone who's maybe not heavily involved in tenant participation generally, they are quite surprised to discover that there is a group of tenants who are going to come in and can legitimately ask for and expect to get a whole series of questions answered or information sought and gathered and shared with them. It's really important that we know who we're speaking to and that they know they have the role to give us that information. It's also quite important because there's always going to be a need for support within an organisation. Whether that support is internal or external delivered, I don't really care. That's not true because I'm from TPAS and I quite think it's important that it's external, but we'll go with that anyway. But it's how do you get that support? I think that's really important. How do you resolve those problems that will inevitably arise when people are working together? How do you arrange activities? Because when you're going out and talking to tenants, you can't just charge up the close and start banging the doors. There is a process to be gone through. How do you know who to speak to? Landlords and tenants working in a panel need to know how to make those arrangements work. One of the great difficulties that I've seen among tenants is that are involved in the panels is actually the writing of the reports. And it's quite often that's the thing that frightens most tenants away from getting involved in the scrutiny, because they're told they will be writing a report and delivering and presenting a report to the board or the committee. We need to work out how that's going to be done, and it needs to be made clear how that would be delivered. Hopefully, a local solution relevant to the people that are involved can be formed. Updating, particularly when recommendations have been accepted and an action plan developed. How do you know that they've actually happened? And how do you know that the impact of those changes or those recommendations have actually had the desired effect? Because we need to have that communication. So how does that happen? Who do you link to get that? One of the quite amazing features of scrutiny is just the amount of information that tenants in scrutiny panels have a legitimate and agreed access to. That's one of the big changes, because in 1990s, there was few tenants that would be able to get the quality and breadth of information about services from the landlord. The landlord would see that as their business. They would not be willing to share it with them. Now it's becoming more and more the norm. So how do we request it? And how do we ask the staff that we need to talk to find out that what's behind this data, to find out what information and advice is about there? How are we going to get that? We need to have that written down somewhere so that the panel, but also the staff and the senior managers and the boards actually are clear how you get that information, that you've got a right to it, and that everyone's happy that you do have that. When we're going out and taking investigations, they can be massive tasks. They can be really enormous pieces of work. And sometimes that's one of the problems with scrutiny. It's we decide that we are going to take on, we're going to scrutinise the entire repair service. And it takes months. And it takes hours and hours and hours of staff time and days of tenants' time. Somehow we need to be able to undertake those investigations in a way that is manageable, both for the tenants and for the staff. When we're producing evidence, there's a whole range of different methods that you could be using. I'm not wanting to try and talk about all of them just now. Many of you will have your favourite types, your favourite ways of going in. You'll be feeling comfortable about it. But we have to keep thinking about, are we using the best methods, or are we just using the methods that we used the last time that worked quite well? I think also, because of the impact that undertaking an investigation can have, we need to be thinking about, when are we actually going to do this? Is it appropriate to be asking staff who might be involved in the annual rent setting, at the same time asking them to be getting involved in supporting an investigation or providing us with large amounts of information. Maybe we need to be thinking about the time of year that we do this investigation. And maybe we think about the cycle of a contract. If, for example, we have a repairs contract, when is it appropriate or when is it sensible to be undertaking investigations into the repair service? I suggest it would probably be before you put pen to paper and actually producing a contract. But because if you have actually just signed up for a multi-million-pound 5-year contract, suddenly coming up with a whole raft of changes is not the best of times. We need to be thinking about when in the cycle of these contracts we actually, or is there going to be a change in legislation? Is the law about to change? Maybe wait until we know a bit about the law before we start investigating it. All of this is going to cost resources and funds. And we have to be mindful when we're undertaking these investigations that it's not an open checkbook. Tenants have a right to expect the panel to be frugal with their rent money, as much as they can expect their landlord to be taken into account the best use to their rent money. So we need to be thinking about that. I mentioned it earlier, writing reports can be a really difficult thing, but there are a whole range of things within the panel where people will need support. And it's vital that staff, tenants, know where that support is coming from. It's vitally important that nobody thinks that because a group of tenants didn't physically put pen to paper and write a report, that they are not in control of every single word and every single idea that's in there. Whoever's writing the report, it has to be the scrutiny panel's decision about whether or not, when that report, what that report is saying and when that report is being presented. How that's done is something that I think we need to be constantly thinking about, because scrutiny panel members change, skill sets within the panels change. At some point, there might be very good report writers who can respond in that way, but other way, maybe through illness or they decide to leave, they are no longer part of the panel. How are we going to respond to that? We can't just assume that that's okay. That's the way we did it last time. It worked out okay, and it's going to happen again that time. It's not. We need to be thinking about it. I believe that the report has to be independent, but I also think that the panel have to feel confident enough to share drafts so that they can check to make sure that, and with the feedback that they get from their drafts, that they haven't misunderstood something that the landlord was intending to do. And that because if they wait until the end, they'll have completed the report and it won't make much sense to the reader. So keeping in contact with people and sharing those things with them, I think is quite an important part of it. Sharing them with some members of the staff. and those members of staff may or may not share with their colleagues, that's a decision that your scrutiny structure would be making. The other part, for vitally important part of scrutiny and for the panel, is when an action plan, when recommendations have been accepted and an action plan has been put together, how do we know what's happening? And I suppose it's one of the things that, as I go around talking to people involved in scrutiny panels, they have moved on and they don't go back to see what's happened with the action plan. So I think it's really important that we put into our normal working relationships within the panel an agreement on how we're going to update ourselves on the action plan's progress and what consequences, what were the impacts of it. If I go back to the recruiting part of it, it seems to me that one of the most important features of being able to recruit new people into scrutiny is the ability to show that scrutiny works. And having an agreed action plan which has changed things and has delivered for tenants, and publicising that is absolutely essential. But how do we do that if we don't check that the action plan has been met and that the consequences and the outcomes that we hoped would be have actually happened? The other part of the scrutiny panel, I think, is really important, is that what we've got performance information and standards, that we've got positive responses to recommendations. And by positive responses, I don't necessarily mean agreeing everything, but actually seeing the recommendations as useful and as ways forward, and to get the progress on the agreed action plan so that we can actually see how that works. I think also you need to be looking at the codes of conduct and the confidentiality, which most panel members would be used to, that I would expect. They vary across, but I think they do need to be involved in updating them. It's really important that the volunteers' time is taken into account. Landlords can sometimes expect volunteers to be doing an awful lot more work than they're willing to do it, and they will chase people away when they do that. And sometimes some volunteers who have the time and have the chase other potential volunteers away by the level of commitment that is required. I think we need to be thinking about how that is delivered. Yes, there needs to be training. We need to be thinking about what training is available. We need to think about what equipment people might need, particularly if we're going into the digitally. Have they got it? Have they got the skills for all of that? We need to be thinking about expenses, because it's not appropriate that people are out of pocket. I think all of that is needed if we're going to have independent panels. I also think it's quite important that we realise that scrutiny panels are part of the wider tenant participation and engagement activities that a landlord is going to get involved in, and we need to make sure that folk are, whatever they are linked in together, whether it's in a tenants group, in a panel, in a customer forum, that they are linked in. Timing is one of the big things that people keep having problems with, because panels seem to take such a long time. We need to be thinking about how we make that time most effective and fit with what volunteers have available. And let's see if this can move. There we go. So a panel for me needs to know what it's wanting to do. And there are certain things that I think most panels do. And the first thing is to monitor the landlord's annual report in the charter. Most panels are involved in that. I think they need to agree and use the data and any other data that's about as the bedrock of what they're looking for and the services that they're going to investigate. I think that tenant panels need to focus on what are tenants' priorities. Yes, the choice of what they're looking at is informed by the data, but when you're looking at it, it needs to be what's most important and what's going to have the biggest impact on tenants. I think panels need to be reaching out to tenants who aren't involved in anything and making sure that they are aware of what's going on and making sure that they understand why that work has been undertaken. Why is the panel looking at allocation, stair cleaning, allocation services, or whatever it is? Do tenants know why they're out there doing it? I think that panels need to link with the day-to-day tenants that are out there. The panels are going to, as far as I believe, undertake investigations, report and agree action plans, and they're going to monitor those action plans. It would be madness to think that scrutiny was an easy thing to get involved in. It isn't. It's very time consuming for tenants. It takes a lot of thought. It is quite a lot of hard work. Benefits are significant, but it is something that we need to be thinking about. How do we process this? How do we get this done in the most easy way? And it's never always going to be easy. I think it's difficult sometimes for tenants to start from a point of the landlord's services and the landlord's targets. Now, as I say, hopefully that landlords will have consulted and been involving people in there beforehand. But quite often, it's that many tenants, in my experience, struggle with challenging their own view of what the service should be. We need to be thinking about what the service is supposed to be. And to make recommendations that are based on the evidence that the panel has been able to collect. Yes, it might not be the entire answer, but it is the answer that we can give with the evidence that we've got. And you'll all be dead pleased to know this is the final slide. I've used this in loads of different presentations about scrutiny, but it seems to me that it is the big thing for me. And if there is enough enthusiasm, if the tenants and the staff have the enthusiasm, they can make this work. You can't impose it on tenants and you can't impose it on staff. But if everyone that's involved sees it as something that is of use, I think it is a vital role and a positive role and a role that people can actually enjoy. Both staff and tenants can actually enjoy. And in my mind, if you're not enjoying it, go and find something else, please. Okay, thanks very much. Hope that was of some use to you.
Thanks, Tony. You want to stop sharing? Just some very interesting points there. It's unusual to have the luxury to have a think back and question and challenge some of the things and some of the approaches that people are taking. And I know, as you do, that lots of scrutiny groups are doing a fabulous amount of work and are driving forward improvements for their landlords, but maybe some need to take a wee step back to challenge and to question their approach. A bit about the report writing. You're absolutely right. It has to be owned by tenants, but it doesn't necessarily have to be written by tenants as long as tenants have ownership of that. Getting the right people. I'm sure all the people in this room have experienced the right people and the people who are there for the wrong reasons, because the greater good of all tenants. So that's another one of the challenges that you threw out there. And again, I think in our work we've come across staff who don't know what scrutiny is about and are all of a sudden are faced by tenants interviewing them. Do I have to give people this information? So there's a really important point there that staff have to be aware and know what scrutiny is all about and understand there's nobody's trying to trick them. You said that right at the start. It's not a case of tricking. It's a case of embracing and finding information to help landlords improve. And so some of you might think, actually, do we really need to embrace and look at what we're doing? And I think one thing you didn't come up with, which is really good, is I went to a TPAS England conference, whenever it was, we were actually allowed to go to conferences, and lots of tenants there said that the recommendations made by the scrutineers were being ignored. And it was almost like a tick box exercise that tenants spent a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of their own time actually reviewing services, only to be ignored. Now, I think in Scotland we have the benefit of having legislation and having the support for tenants. And then some of these landlords in England wondered why the scrutiny groups disappeared. Well, would you stay if you spent huge amounts of time and huge amounts of money, huge amounts of energy and effort reviewing and scrutinising a service? Would you hang about if everything was ignored? I really don't think so. So, Tony, do you want to come in there before we just go into the break?
What you were saying there about the recommendations being made and organisations saying no. It's perfectly legitimate to say no, but also it's essential that you say why you're saying no. And if people if landlords, it could simply be, we can improve everything if we just, charge people another £100 a month. That's dead easy, But the consequences of what's been done, or if we are emphasising this part of the service, that part of the service will fall down. So that if that information is shared, if people are treated, if tenants are treated like grown-ups and given the full facts of that of that reasoning why, I think most people will accept that and understand why that can't be done.
Yeah.
And it's not something to be scared of.
No, I think it goes back to the routes to reporting. If there's a quick fix. But anyway, Tony and I could end up having a debate here, and the next part is about asking questions. Alistair, is it brief because we're going to just go into a break, or can it wait until after the break?
It's very brief. It's just
okay.
Tony mentioned about knocking on tenants' doors to gain information. How do you get around GDPR with that for a scrutiny group?
I know that Stirling Tenants Assembly.
In mixed communities where you get owner-occupiers and tenants, we have had a situation saying, how do you know I'm a tenant?
Yeah, well, yeah. I think that you would only go, because I remember back in the day, Alistair, when we were doing the potential stock transfer from the housing associations in the Western Isles to Hebridean Housing Partnership, we had a list of who the tenants were and who they were not. And I know that Stirling Tenants Assembly, as part of their scrutineering of the services, the staff are phoning tenants, but it's the tenants that are speaking to tenants. So there are certainly ways that can be done. And I think when we come back in after the coffee break, if anyone's got any other experience round about that, we should be taking that on board. So can we keep that question for after the coffee break, and hope that the national grid can cope with the number of people in this room, and there's not going to be a surge and everybody gets a power cut. So it's now 20 past. So 20-minute coffee break. We'll see you back here at 20 minutes to 12.
So before you disappear, if during the question time, if you've got a question, if you don't want to ask it online, or if we don't get the time to do that, if you fire in an email or whatever, then we'll endeavour to try and reply to you.
Enjoy your coffee, folks. I'll see you at 22. Bye.
Right.